August 3rd, 1943, 11:47 a.m. A hospital tent outside Palermo, Sicily. The canvas walls rippled in the Mediterranean heat like dying lungs gasping for air. General George S. Patton, Jr., blood and guts himself, boots polished to a mirror shine despite the dust that covered everything else, stepped through the entrance flap. His ivory-handled revolvers caught the sliver of sunlight that penetrated the gloom. Around him, wounded soldiers lay on cots, men with missing limbs, shrapnel-torn faces, bodies wrapped in bandages already turning rust-colored from seeping blood. He moved between them like a priest administering last rites, his voice booming with forced warmth. "You're going to be fine, son. Your country's proud of you, soldier." Each word carefully chosen, each handshake deliberate. Then he saw him. A young man, maybe 22, sitting upright on his cot, shaking. No bandages, no blood, no visible wounds at all. Private Charles H. Cool. Patton stopped. The tent went quiet, except for the distant rumble of artillery and the buzzing of flies that feasted on everything the war left behind. "What's wrong with you?" Patton's voice cut through the silence. The private looked up, eyes red-rimmed, jaw trembling. I can't take it anymore, sir. The shelling. I can't stand the shells." 4 seconds of silence. Then Patton's hand moved, fast, instinctive, brutal. The slap echoed like a gunshot. "You're a goddamned coward!" Patton's voice rose to a roar that made the nurses freeze mid-step. "You're a disgrace to the Army! You hear me? A disgrace!" He slapped him again, harder. Private Cool fell backward off the cot, his helmet clattering to the dirt floor. Patton stood over him, hand on one of his ivory revolvers. "I won't have cowards in my hospitals." He turned to the medical officer, who stood paralyzed, board gripped in white-knuckled hands. "Get this man back to the front, now! I won't have the brave boys seeing yellow bellies pretending to be wounded." Then he stormed out. The tent flap swung closed behind him. And in that moment, in those 90 seconds of rage, the most feared, most successful, most legendary general in the American Army had just destroyed himself. Not the man, the myth. Born November 11th, 1885, into California wealth and military tradition. His grandfather was a Confederate colonel killed at Cedar Creek. His great-uncle died at Gettysburg. Patton grew up believing war was in his blood, literally, passed down through generations like a sacred birthright. He was dyslexic, struggled in school, but memorized everything: Homer, Caesar, Napoleon. He could recite entire passages of ancient battle strategies. He believed in reincarnation, was convinced he'd fought at Troy, marched with Alexander, charged with the Crusaders. West Point, 1909, Olympic pentathlete, 1912, tank commander in World War I, where he was shot leading from the front, and loved every second of it. By 1943, George S. Patton had become something more than a general. He was America's warrior god. His 7th Army had torn through North Africa like a hurricane, while British Field Marshal Montgomery took cautious, measured steps. Patton drove his men 100 miles in 3 days. Newspaper headlines screamed his name. Soldiers feared him, worshipped him, would follow him straight into hell if he asked. He wore custom uniforms, carried pearl-handled revolvers. He'd correct anyone who called them ivory. Only a pimp from a cheap New Orleans whorehouse would carry pearl-handled pistols. He fined soldiers $25 for not wearing their helmets, then personally paid the fines of men too poor to afford them. His philosophy was simple: attack, attack, attack. Never defend. The enemy should be fleeing from you, not the other way around. But there was something else beneath the bravado, something darker. Patton believed fear was contagious, that one coward could infect an entire unit, that battle fatigue, what we now call PTSD, was weakness disguised as medicine, a virus that would destroy his army from within if he didn't cut it out like a surgeon removing gangrene. He'd seen it in World War I, soldiers shaking in corners, unable to fight, unable to function. And now, in Sicily, as the heat climbed past 100 degrees and his men fought without sleep, without water, driving toward Palermo in a race against Montgomery, he was seeing it again. Men breaking down, crying, refusing orders. It ate at him. Every night in his tent, writing in his journal by lamplight, he'd write about discipline, about strength, about the sacred duty to push through suffering. "Fatigue makes cowards of us all," he'd written just days before. He believed it with religious fervor. And religion demands sacrifice. Within 24 hours, every soldier in Sicily knew. Within 48, war correspondents were filing stories. Within 72, Major General Omar Bradley, Patton's subordinate and increasingly his rival, was shaking his head in disbelief. But the story wasn't over. Another hospital, this one near Nicosia. Patton was making his rounds again, still convinced he was administering necessary discipline, still believing he was saving his army from the disease of fear.
He approached Private Paul G. Bennett, 21 years old, 4 years of service, artillery forward observer who'd been in constant combat for months. Bennett was curled on his cot, sobbing. "What's your trouble?" Patton demanded. "It's my nerves," Bennett whispered. "I can't stand the shelling anymore." Patton exploded. He slapped Bennett across the face with his gloves, then grabbed him by the collar and dragged him toward the tent entrance. "Your nerves, hell! You're just a goddamned coward!" He pulled out his revolver. The nurses screamed. Medical officers rushed forward. Patton waved the gun at Bennett's head. "I ought to shoot you myself right now, you whimpering coward." The commanding medical officer, Lieutenant Colonel Donald E. Currier, stepped between them. His voice was calm but firm. "General, this man is sick. He's been in combat for months without relief." Patton shoved Bennett away. The private collapsed to the dirt, still sobbing. "I won't have these brave boys seeing yellow bellies babied," Patton shouted to the entire tent. Then he turned and left. Outside, his driver later recalled, Patton was shaking, not from anger, from something else. Supreme Commander of Allied forces in Europe, Patton's superior, his friend, and now his problem. Dwight D. Eisenhower sat in his headquarters in Algiers, reading witness statements from doctors, nurses, war correspondents, each one more damning than the last. Struck a patient suffering from psychoneurosis, drew his weapon and threatened, called him a coward in front of wounded men. Ike rubbed his temples. He'd known Patton for 30 years, knew his brilliance, knew his demons, knew he was the best field commander America had, maybe the only one who could match Rommel's tactical genius. But this, the war correspondents wanted blood. Drew Pearson, the muckraking radio journalist, was already preparing to break the story nationwide. The headline practically wrote itself: "American General Beats Shell-Shocked Soldiers." Secretary of War Henry Stimson sent a telegram, "This cannot stand." Eisenhower drafted 3 different responses that night. The first relieved Patton of command immediately. The second sent him home in disgrace. The third was a masterpiece of political calculation and personal loyalty. Patton was summoned to Eisenhower's headquarters. He arrived expecting a reprimand, maybe a warning. He got neither. Eisenhower stood when Patton entered, didn't offer his hand. "Sit down, George." The voice was ice. Eisenhower slid the reports across the desk.
Read them." Patton scanned the pages. His face remained impassive. Years of command had taught him to show nothing. But his hands gripped the papers too tightly. The edges crumpled. "I did what was necessary for discipline," Patton said finally. "You assaulted sick men." Eisenhower's voice rose for the first time. "You threatened to shoot American soldiers." "They were malingerers." "They were your men." Eisenhower slammed his palm on the desk. The sound cracked through the room like thunder. Silence. Eisenhower stood, turned toward the window. Outside, Algiers sprawled in the afternoon heat. Somewhere out there, men were fighting, dying, following orders from generals who were supposed to protect them. When he spoke again, his voice was quiet, lethal. "I could relieve you right now. I probably should. Half of Washington wants your head. The press is circling like vultures. You've given them ammunition that could destroy everything we've built." Patton said nothing. "But I won't." Patton's head jerked up. Eisenhower turned back to face him. "You're too valuable. The Germans fear you more than any other Allied commander. Your drive on Palermo probably shortened this campaign by weeks. You saved lives with your aggression, George. Thousands of lives." He walked around the desk, stood directly in front of Patton. "But you will apologize, publicly, to every division, every regiment, every unit in the 7th Army. You will face those men, and you will tell them you were wrong." "Ike, Enough. I'm not finished." Eisenhower's eyes were steel. "You will write personal letters to both soldiers. You will visit them if they'll see you, and you will never, ever lay hands on another American soldier as long as you wear that uniform. Is that clear?" Patton's jaw worked. His face had gone red, then white. Finally, "Yes, sir." "If you violate this, George, I don't care if you're winning the war single-handedly. I will relieve you and send you home, and your career will end not in glory, but in a hospital tent in Sicily, where you forgot what it means to be a soldier." Eisenhower returned to his desk, picked up his pen. The meeting was over. Patton stood, saluted, and walked out. He made it to his jeep before the shaking started. August 20th, 1933, a field outside Palermo. The entire 1st Infantry Division assembled in formation, 15,000 men standing in the Sicilian sun. Patton climbed on the hood of a jeep. No microphone, just his voice carrying across the ranks. "I want to apologize." The words came out stiff, forced, like pulling shrapnel from a wound. "I have criticized and interfered with hospital staffs. I have also insulted individual soldiers." He paused. The silence from 15,000 men was absolute. "My only excuse is that I have been under a terrible strain for the past few months." Some of the men shifted uncomfortably. Others stared straight ahead, faces unreadable.
"If any man in this division believes he was unjustly treated, he may see me privately, and I will make amends." He stepped down. No applause, no cheers, just the sound of boots shuffling in dust. He repeated this speech 7 more times to every major unit in his command. Each time the words came a little easier. Each time they meant a little more. But the damage was done. His radio broadcast reached 20 million Americans. This is Drew Pearson with an exclusive report on General George S. Patton, the swashbuckling commander who has been hailed as a military hero. Then he told them everything. The phones at the War Department lit up like Christmas. Congressmen demanded investigations. Mothers of soldiers wrote angry letters. Veterans organizations called for court-martial. The headline in the New York Times, "General Patton's slapping incidents disclosed." Patton was in Sicily when the news hit. He read the papers in his tent, alone. Then he wrote in his journal, "My fame is now thoroughly besmirched. I am probably persona non grata. All this for a couple of slaps. It is a hell of a note." Eisenhower kept his word. He didn't relieve Patton, but he did sideline him. For 9 months, while the Allies planned the invasion of Normandy, Patton sat in England. No command, no combat. He was used as a decoy. The Germans believed he would lead the D-Day invasion, so he commanded a phantom army of inflatable tanks and fake radio traffic, while the real invasion happened without him. He called it his purgatory. July 1944. 6 weeks after D-Day. The Allies were bogged down in Normandy's hedgerows, bleeding for every mile. Eisenhower finally unleashed his caged lion. Patton took command of the Third Army. Within 6 weeks, he broke out of Normandy and raced 600 miles across France. His tanks moved so fast the Germans couldn't organize resistance. His name made headlines again, this time for the right reasons. December 1944, the Battle of the Bulge. The Germans launched a massive counteroffensive surrounding the 101st Airborne at Bastogne. Eisenhower called an emergency meeting of commanders. "George," he said, "how soon can you get 3 divisions to Bastogne?" Everyone in the room knew it was impossible. Patton's army was 100 miles south, engaged in its own offensive. To disengage, turn north, and attack through winter storms in 48 hours? 48 hours, Patton said. The room went silent. He did it in 36. The relief of Bastogne became legendary. Patton's Third Army saved the 101st, smashed the German flank, and turned the last German offensive into a slaughter. Eisenhower sent him a one-line telegram. "Well done, George." Patton stood in a destroyed German town, watching refugees stream past. Women, children, old men, all that was left. That night, he wrote in his journal, "I wonder if I have been fighting on the wrong side." It was the beginning of the end. He began making inflammatory statements, criticizing Soviet Russia while they were still allies, suggesting former Nazis should be used to help rebuild Germany. The press, already suspicious, pounced. Eisenhower called him again. This time, the conversation was shorter. "George, you need to learn to shut up." But Patton couldn't. The war had been his oxygen. Without it, he was drowning in peacetime, suffocating in politics, dying in a world that no longer needed warriors. September 1945. Eisenhower relieved him of command of the Third Army, gave him a ceremonial position overseeing military history. It was a gold watch and a retirement home. Patton knew it. A road near Mannheim, Germany. Patton was riding in his staff car, heading out for a pheasant hunt. His driver swerved to avoid a truck. The Cadillac crashed into an army vehicle at low speed, just a fender bender. Nobody else was hurt. But Patton, sitting in the back seat, lurched forward. His head struck a metal partition. His neck snapped. C3 and C4 vertebrae fractured, paralyzed from the neck down. They took him to a hospital in Heidelberg, the same kind of hospital where he'd slapped those soldiers 2 years earlier. This time, he was the patient, lying still, unable to move, staring at the ceiling. The irony wasn't lost on him. "This is a hell of a way for a soldier to die," he told his wife Beatrice. 12 days later, on December 21, 1945, he died of a pulmonary embolism. He was 60 years old. They buried him in Luxembourg at the American Military Cemetery, Plot I, Row 9, Grave 4, the same ground where thousands of his Third Army soldiers were buried. He'd insisted on it. "I want to be buried with my men."
No general cemetery, no Arlington, no monument separate from the ranks, just another white cross in an endless field of them. He was back in Washington, being groomed for politics, the man who would become president. But he sent a letter to Beatrice Patton. Years later, it was found in her belongings. George was the most brilliant commander of an army in open warfare that America has produced, but he was also his own worst enemy. Had he learned to control himself, there's no limit to what he could have accomplished. The letter wasn't made public for 30 years. Private Charles Cool, the first soldier Patton slapped, was diagnosed with chronic dysentery, malaria, and battle fatigue. He returned to duty, fought through Italy, and was awarded the Bronze Star. After the war, he refused to speak publicly about the incident for decades. When he finally did, in 1971, he said, "I knew Patton was under tremendous pressure. I hold no grudge. He was a great general. What happened between us was between soldiers." Private Paul Bennett, the second soldier, also returned to duty. He fought all the way to Germany. In 1944, a reporter found him at the front lines and asked about Patton. Bennett smiled. "Old blood and guts? He's a hell of a general. I'd follow him anywhere." The reporter was shocked. "But he struck you. He threatened to shoot you." "Yeah," Bennett said. "He also led us to victory. One bad day doesn't erase everything else."
Patton crossed a line. He was wrong. What he did was indefensible. But Eisenhower didn't destroy him for it. He corrected him, disciplined him, forced him to face what he'd done. And then, when Patton proved he'd learned, Eisenhower gave him another chance. Not because Patton deserved it, because the war needed him. Sometimes the world needs imperfect people to do necessary things. Sometimes you have to manage genius instead of discarding it. Sometimes punishment isn't about destruction, it's about correction. Eisenhower could have court-martialed Patton. Would have been justified. The press wanted it, Congress wanted it. It would have been the safe, politically correct decision. Instead, he made the hard one. He saved Patton's career just long enough for Patton to save thousands of lives at Bastogne. The movie Patton was released. George C. Scott won the Oscar for Best Actor. The film opened with Patton's famous speech in front of an enormous American flag. "Americans love a winner and will not tolerate a loser. The very thought of losing is hateful to Americans." It was vintage Patton, bombastic, aggressive, unapologetic. The film barely mentioned the slapping incident, a 2-minute scene, quickly forgotten in the sweep of military victories. And suddenly, Patton was a hero again. A new generation discovered him, saw only the brilliance, the bravado, the victories. The complexity disappeared into legend. But Eisenhower, watching from his retirement, knew better. He'd seen the whole man, the genius and the monster, the warrior and the fool, and he'd understood something that the movies never could. Real leadership isn't about perfection. It's about knowing when to punish, when to forgive, and when to give someone a second chance to become who they're capable of being. It cost Patton 9 months of his career. It cost 2 soldiers their dignity. It cost Eisenhower his easy friendship with a man he'd known for 3 decades. But in the end, it taught all 3 of them something about the distance between strength and cruelty, between discipline and abuse, between being a warrior and being a leader. Patton never admitted he was wrong, not really. Even in his apologies, you can hear the resentment, the belief that he was right and the world was weak. But he changed his behavior, and maybe that's all we can ask. Maybe redemption isn't about understanding why you were wrong. Maybe it's just about not doing it again. Eisenhower understood that, gave Patton the space to prove he'd learned, even if he never fully admitted the lesson. And when the moment came, when Bastogne was surrounded and the war hung in the balance, Patton proved his former friend right.
Not about a general who lost his temper, not about a commander who got away with assault. About two men, one brilliant and broken, one steady and wise, who understood that winning a war sometimes means losing an argument, that command sometimes means showing mercy, and that the line between hero and villain is measured not in medals earned, but in lessons learned. George S. Patton crossed a line that day in Sicily, but Dwight Eisenhower gave him a road back, and in doing so, he showed us all what real leadership looks like.